Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Stay on Target, Games Radar Plus's weekly look at a galaxy far, far away. With me today are Jordan Farley of SFX Magazine, Chris Thurston of PC Gamer, I'm Richard Edwards, the editor of SFX Magazine. Now, we're going to have a look today at some of the games coming from the Star Wars universe, or what we might expect to see over the next few months. But before that, we're going to have a look at the news. And it's been quite a busy week in news terms. Now, after we recorded last week's episode, we found out some really big news about episode 7, Force Awakens. We found out who Andy Serkis is playing. Now, we've known for a long while that he's in the movie, but now we know who it is. And the role is Supreme Leader Snoke. Now, what do we think?
Interesting name, to say the least.
Yeah,
what a name.
All the names you could do, it doesn't sound the most exciting. I mean, Supreme Leader obviously has implications somewhere, but Snoke.
Yeah, I mean, they've also got Captain Phasma, which is anher odd name.
Yeah,
but,
there's a lot of things that seem like slight misspellings of other words, like snake or plasma.
But Supreme Leader's interesting because, of course, Palpatine was the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic before he turned to the dark side, or was revealed to be the Emperor. So maybe there's an implication there that there's a parallel between the two characters.
Yeah, sorry.
We said before that it was quite likely that Serkis would be playing some kind of Ian McDiarmid style figure based on his voiceover for the first trailer.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is he's the one who's talking about the dark side and the light of the Force.
He's felt an awakening, so he obviously has some kind of affinity with the Force. Not necessarily a Sith Lord, but I think probably maybe likely.
Well, it looks like he might have made the land grab for whatever was left of the Empire, perhaps.
The interesting thing about this image, which is Andy Serkis at home.
Well, I mean, it was kind of inevitable that he was going to be a performance character,
but that indicates not a human character, which
or either that or a human who has had something happen to his face.
Yeah,
that's true. That is true.
It's impossible to replicate with makeup.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, but I was going to argue that would still be a little bit off-piste for formerly the Empire anyway, which was all human in the original trilogy.
Well, that's true. And also I think it's interesting, if you look at the dots, obviously his face is all dotted up, so that's going to be important for the performance, but the dots get less and he doesn't have very much on his legs, so possibly he has either alien legs or something mechanical.
Yeah, I think the dots on his face are for the performance capture on his face, which needs to be incredibly detailed and nuanced, whereas I don't think you need quite as many dots over the rest of his body to map his movements.
I'm not sure also how much we could take from this, because it's quite common for performance capture for the face to be recorded separately from the body, and there's no way in this studio that he's going to be walking around.
No.
Like, unless the scene takes place in a 6 foot by 6 foot circle, there's probably not, you know what I mean? They're probably not looking filmed.
I can imagine him being kind of sat on some kind of throne, Palpatine style.
Yeah,
in this
he
scene.
is definitely sat on some kind of throne.
Yeah, and he looks very sinister there. I'd be very surprised if he's playing someone from the Resistance, given that glare that he's.
Well, I mean, the voiceover, he doesn't sound like someone from the good side, does he?
No, unless unless the Jedi are opening out their, borders to include obviously evil people now.
Now, beyond Force Awakens, there's a few rumours floating around. We're not sure how substantial they are yet about the Anthology movie. So obviously we know that Rogue One, which is due in 2016, that Gareth Edwards directing. 2018, it's all up for grabs, isn't it? I mean, Josh Trank is no longer directing. And the rumours now seem to be that it's a Boba Fett Han Solo Western. Now, how do you feel about that?
I've always felt that... I mean, I'm sure it'd be great, but I've always felt that kind of doing backstories of original trilogy characters was kind of the wrong thing to do with the anthology films, because I don't really want to see a Han Solo backstory, if I'm honest.
Oh, yeah, he kind of appears fully formed. That's one of the great things about him, isn't it?
Exactly. It's the same with a lot of the characters in the original trilogy. Another one that we'll come to in a minute. But but I like the sound of a Western. There's a great episode of the Clone Wars, which is basically like a remake of Seven Samurai, which is a Star Wars Western, which was amazing. So I'm sure they could do an even better job on the big screen.
Well, I mean, my feeling about this is very much that if you're going to go and do standalone movies in the Star Wars universe, what's the point of going back to old characters if you've got this whole world to explore? You could do every kind of thing. You could do a romantic comedy in the Star Wars universe if you really wanted, So why go back? Also, how do you recast Han Solo?
That was what I was going to ask as well. Like, that's the trickiest thing, because that's the sort of the bridge they haven't really crossed with the original trilogy characters, with the exception, I suppose, of Obi-Wan. That as soon as you start sort of meddling with that myth too much. He'd maybe water down the whole. I would actually, but on that note, I would actually be for a Boba Fett movie because because I think the character has already had his mystique stripped away by the prequels. You've now got the image of baby Boba Fett going, oh no, my dad's brains.
At the same time with Boba Fett, though, you don't know how he got from this kid on his own to a really hard bounty hunter who then gets eaten by a pit.
Falls in a hole.
Yeah. So I mean that could be interesting.
And also because he's a man in a mask, and it's a more anonymous character. Recasting him is not as much of a. It's not as much of a big deal.
And presumably Lucasfilm is circling Chris Pratt to play the young Han Solo, like they want him to be young Indiana Jones, because that's what Chris Pratt is linked to every.
Chris Pratt isn't very Harrison Ford.
No, but that's not stopped the rumours.
I like
Indiana Jones.
I don't think anyone's very Harrison Ford though, which is the problem.
Yeah, we don't have one. Whereas our generation's Harrison Ford.
Yeah, but this film's also rumoured to have Lando in as well, a young Lando, which, although not quite as iconic as Han Solo, is still, I think, would still be a little bit tricky to recast.
Yeah. Though of course Lando is in Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah. This is fan service the movie.
Yeah.
Now, another one they talk about, another rumour is that there will be a prequel-sequel anthology movie, which gets really complicated because it focuses on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, apparently Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor is up for playing again. So this would presumably be set in between episodes 3 and 4, and would just be old man in a desert. Yes, hanging out with random people. Oh yes,
forgetting droids that he obviously owned.
Yes.
It's an interesting one. I think the idea is it's going to be separate from the anthologies. It's going to be its own separate thing in addition to the main series of film and the anthologies, which could also be its own trilogy of films, which seems crazy. It's so much Star Wars.
Do we even have a word for a trilogy that would go between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy?
An inter-trilogy?
I quite an Obi-Wan Kenobi trilogy. Or
I don't think it's the worst idea in the world, because there's 30 years there, or however long.
20
years. But it is
20
Tatooine,
years
which is kind of... I mean, a lot happens there in the Star Wars universe, but...
I mean, you look at the Clone Wars, the animated series, just how much goes on between episodes 2 and 3 in that series. I mean, they could tell all sorts of stories in the years in between if they want to go a bit crazy.
And it's sort of running into Luke every so often.
Yeah, exactly.
As he grows up. Like... what was the film where they filmed a boy's life in real time over 12 years?
Oh, Boyhood.
Boyhood, yeah. Basically, it's Boyhood, but with Luke Skywalker. That would be great. That
Obi-Wan on a farm for 12 years.
Exactly. As Luke goes through puberty slightly, well, I guess he's still going through puberty in The New Hope, but...
Looking for power converters.
Watch find the Tashi Station. I mean, I think that is the part of the films that I'm least interested to see a movie cover now. Like, they don't really need to reverse and drive over that.
I mean, Rebels is actually doing that sort of 5 minutes, and it's about the birth of the rebellion, which is actually quite interesting.
And Obi-Wan has been in Rebels, right? He's he is going to pop up.
That's what. I mean, James Arnold Taylor, who does the voice, is definitely around.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's stories to be told in that time period with Obi-Wan, definitely.
And also, appropriately given your T-shirt, the rumours of a Yoda movie refuse to go away. But that seems an odd one to me.
And just a man in the swamp, you have the man in the desert movies and the man in the swamp movies.
Though it could be about how Yoda became Uber Jedi. I mean, it could be a young Yoda.
Yeah, that seems likely. Again, it's another kind of mystique-shattering idea.
Well, that's it.
That's
and as far as I'm aware, they've never even divulged what species Yoda is.
Exactly.
I mean, that's one of these big. Sort of
they did in like some comic that was almost immediately like by Lucas. Like, no, that's not canon.
Yeah.
Or that race of people that happen to look like Yoda. That's not Yoda. Which I don't really know why it's ever been a mystery. Because why would that be a mystery in a universe with millions of different
maybe he's the last of his kind, and that's why he's so good at Force.
I can only imagine, as with many of these things, that George Lucas one day intended to tell that story on the big screen or something, and just said no one else can do it because I want to do it.
Yeah.
Now, you've noticed that this chap's appeared behind us. Now, he's not actually from Star Wars, but we thought it was worth mentioning because he's from Black Angel, which is a movie that Roger Christian, who was the production designer on the original Star Wars, is turning into a movie, and he's currently doing an Indiegogo sort of crowdfunding thing. So you see the address for that on the screen. That's quite interesting because this was a short film that they attached to the front of Empire Strikes Back. So there's kind of a tying together, and I think he's actually admitted that this probably wouldn't be even a goer if it wasn't for Star Wars. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of people have fondness for it because it it aired before The Empire Strikes Back, and it hasn't been available since. Like, it hasn't been on DVD, or it hasn't even been on YouTube until about 2 weeks ago, when it suddenly appeared, and it's all of a sudden it's back in the news, and there's going to be this film with Rutger Hauer and a few other people in it, with this all-star cast. And
Oh, John Rhys Davis as well.
yeah, John Rhys Davis.
Which again ties back to Lucasfilm because of the Indiana Jones connection.
It does. Yeah, so I mean, it's reasonably exciting news. I mean, Roger Christian didn't do the best work in his later career, but he did some amazing stuff in like the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, very much so.
Worked on Star Wars, did like second unit direction on Return of the Jedi and Episode 1. So he's got very close connections to the Star Wars universe.
Just don't mention Battlefield Earth.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to, but you did.
I did. And finally, there's a bit of news that might be a little spoilery, so you might want to whiz on a couple of minutes if you are reading Jason Aaron's Star Wars comic. But, shock, Han Solo is married. Who knew?
What a scoundrel.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, it's turned out that it's just been revealed that Han Solo has a wife. So this is the story that's taking place between episodes 4 and 5, and we've met Sana Solo.
Yeah. Yeah, we find out when Han Solo stood right next to Leia as well, to rub it in our faces.
So this is before they've properly got together. So she just thinks he's a scruffy-looking nerf herder at this point.
It is.
Yeah, interesting. I haven't actually read this comic series yet, so kind of withholding judgment. But
yeah,
they have to do some gymnastics to explain how they relate to each other in episode 5.
Well, that's the interesting because
Unless
this is
Leia and Han are both assholes.
this is Star Wars canon, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, as decreed by Disney, all the comics are 100% canon now.
So, but this may be Firefly. You know, Firefly expect that she's not really his wife at all.
Yeah, exactly. This does happen right at the end of the comic. It's basically the cliffhanger of the comic. So there's a lot still to be explained in the next issue. So, you know, for all we know, she could be lying her face off, but it seems unlikely given Han Solo's reaction to her appearance at the end of this comic. He has his face in his hand, and he's like, "Oh no."
So he presumably has met her. Anyway, okay, on that bombshell, we're going to end the news, our bumper news session, and now we're going to have a look at some games. Okay, games have long been a massive part of the Star Wars universe, and the announcement of The Force Awakens a couple of years ago meant that we were likely to get a whole new raft of stuff. Now, the big announcement so far has been a new Battlefront game. Now, why are we so excited about this one?
Battlefront's interesting because Battlefront, the original 2 Battlefront games, which covered the original trilogy period and the prequel trilogy period, got this sort of cult following despite, like, for basically adapting Star Wars onto an existing multiplayer template, which was the one that had been pioneered by Battlefield, this sort of, you know, mixed arms vehicle and infantry combat, and taking scenarios from the Star Wars universe and sort of just letting players play them out in a relatively sandbox environment. Unlike a bunch of the most popular Star Wars games, it wasn't popular because of the story it told or the characters it introduced. It was popular purely because it acted as this sort of great big sandpit to mess around in.
You could shoot stormtroopers.
Yeah, or you could be a stormtrooper or a Jedi or Darth Vader or whatever, and just sort of like reenact these battles in different configurations. And now Battlefront is in the hands of DICE, who are the company that made Battlefield in the first place, who hadn't previously worked on this series. So that's a kind of interesting cyclical kind of development pattern. It's not a huge amount has been nothing's been played yet by anyone outside of DICE. They've shown off a bunch of things, and what they've shown off is a game that takes place throughout the original trilogy primarily, with 1 or 2 missions that will take place as after the original trilogy, but substantially before the new movies. Pointedly, the Battle of Jakku, which suggests that they're going to explain why there's all those Star Destroyers and X-Wings crashed all over that desert planet from the trailer. And but the rest of the game seems very much like a kind of a successor to Battlefront in terms of being quite an arcadey team infantry combat game where you can earn points in order to be able to play as, for a round, Darth Vader, for example, or Boba Fett they showed in the trailer.
Yeah.
Implied Han Solo with the presence of the Falcon, that kind of thing.
I mean, do you think that sort of the fact that it's kind of just appealing to fans and it's something that fans enjoy the experience, do you think that's why they focus on this first off? I mean, did it seem the most obvious choice?
My theory is that there's not going to be a Battlefield game this year, and this is an annual franchise pretty much. DICE put out a mass infantry combat game every year. Last year it was Battlefield Hardline. There is almost certainly not going to be a Battlefield game this year unless something's announced at E3. So that'll, I think this probably made sense for EA, who own the property now, as their kind of sort of day and date entry to go along with the film. It's interesting that actually nothing's been announced with regards to a more obvious film tie-in game than this. I mean, Battlefront, I mean, it's a very fan-popular series as well. I think, and DICE are a good developer to assign to it. So I suspect rather than it being some kind of calculated, this is the most popular thing we could do, it's a combination of a lot of different conveniences coming together at once. Series people like, fits a development slot for the publisher that they would be filling anyway with something. So yeah, I think along those lines it made sense.
And I think the DICE have spoken about how they were very keen to do it from the moment that EA got the Star Wars license deal when Disney bought Lucasfilm. EA had to make a series of Star Wars games, and DICE basically said, "Yeah, we want to do Battlefront." And I guess that's the stars aligned. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this moment of serendipity where the right license is in the right place with the right kind of opening in a development schedule to make it happen.
I mean, do you think they'll sort of play around with the formula much, or bring sort of something new to it?
I mean, it looks fairly similar. I mean, it looks a lot more streamlined and modern. I mean, the first two games were quite expansive. Like there's a hell of a lot you could do in those games, whereas this game feels a lot more almost limited in its scope. Like there's only 4 maps, right? And
I actually couldn't confirm that either way.
Yeah, at the moment they've only announced 4, and I think there's a few quibbles over how much you're actually going to be able to do in it.
The original Battlefront games were interesting because, unlike Battlefield, they had this galactic conquest mode where you would play individual matches in order to determine who owned what planet in a kind of broader strategic overview, and you could do that against the AI, and you could kind of orchestrate your own version of the Galactic Civil War or whatever, but as the rebels and sort of fight from planet to planet. And they have announced absolutely nothing, as far as I know, about the return of features like that. So I think it remains to be seen, because it's a new developer taking on the property, so there's not really any way to confirm what will stay behind, apart from the fact that the Frostbite engine, which is making this picture, looks lovely.
It does look.
It does very good. It does very good trees, and whoever decided that they should just set the entire thing in Endor was probably a genius, because that was the correct decision to have made. I suppose the other things they've announced is that there's a lot more interaction with AI controlled units than there would be in Battlefront. So there's an example of someone calling in a bunch of Y-wings to bomb an incoming Imperial walker, but those Y-wings not being players, they're being sort of an AI controlled strike kind of thing, which I guess plays to the sense that it could be a more streamlined game.
Yeah.
Now, we know about Battlefront, but nothing else so far has been confirmed since we've got into this whole sort of new Star Wars shared universe. I mean, are there any things that we think might happen?
Well, we do know that Visceral are making a Star Wars game, who are the Dead Space developers, who also did Battlefield Hardline. And they've enlisted people like Amy Hennig and Todd Stashwick, who had close ties to Naughty Dog. Amy Hennig especially worked on the Uncharted series, and they're all working on this Star Wars adventure game, which isn't going to be like a big multiplayer arena shooter like Battlefront is. It's going to be presumably narrative driven, and the big rumor is it's going to be possibly Han Solo based.
The evidence for that is kind of who they got involved by bringing in people from the Uncharted series. Uncharted was basically the Indiana Jones game that never happened. Couldn't have been more inspired by that series. And Nathan Drake, the main character of the Indiana Jones of Uncharted, was played by Nolan North, who's now rumoured to be attached to this project as well. Nolan North is an incredibly versatile voice actor and has done a very convincing Harrison Ford impression, at least in one performance before. So it's not out of the question that he's involved. Secondly, they've been just coyly tweeting lots of pictures of the Millennium Falcon, Han Solo action figures, Han Solo's appearance in Mercenaries, which is an earlier game, and so on. So there's a bunch of reasons to suspect that that's what they're doing, and it would make sense as well. Like with Star Wars 1313, which is now canned,
which because everyone was really excited about this idea of a sort of, I guess, scuzzy level of Coruscant.
Well, what was going to be a Boba Fett game?
Fett game,
like they kept it really under wraps. They had this idea that it's just an anonymous bounty hunter for the purposes of this tech demo. But I remember a story of a colleague going to see that game, or in an very early form at the studio, and although they would never ever confirm that it was really a Boba Fett game, there was just a big picture of Boba Fett on the whiteboard behind the guy.
Yeah, but I can understand. I mean, I'd probably do that anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Either as a direct message to the press or as a hidden one. You know, like a schematic for Boba Fett's rifle, that kind of thing. But yeah, so they had this, they almost made, and this is exactly the kind of game that it looked very Uncharted. That's what everyone said about it when they first showed it off. This was E3 a couple of years ago. And they implied, they eventually kind of came out that it was going to be a Boba Fett game. So there was this, obviously this existing interest, or there was, in something a bit grittier, like a third-person cover shooter set in the underbelly of the Star Wars universe. And if that's now a Han Solo game, that would make total sense.
Well, I guess so there is definitely a market. We've seen that before with Knights of the Old Republic, the sort of serious side of Star Wars. I mean, do we get the sense that Disney are going to sort of plunder that? Because I mean, I think I guess they'd be crazy not to, because it's such a thing that people like about the Star Wars galaxy.
The question of Knights of the Republic is an interesting one, because EA now working on Star Wars games again. EA now own BioWare. They didn't when BioWare made Knights of the Old Republic. That is another one of those big acts of serendipity that could potentially mean something, but it doesn't seem that likely at the moment. Like, BioWare have 2 projects in the works. One is some kind of new Mass Effect game, and the other is what they're saying is a completely new IP, which so obviously wouldn't be Star Wars. So unless there's a third thing going on, there could be. It might just be that they keep, you know, ticking over with Star Wars: The Old Republic, and that's that. Regarding the gritty stuff in general, a game that I would really like to see them approach the format of again was Republic Commando, which was a complete hidden gem of that era of Clone Wars games, because most of the Clone Wars games were complete crap, but Republic Commando was great. And it was great because it took the Clone Wars and made them, it was just a war movie set during the Clone Wars with a squad of elite clones, which doesn't make any sense, but let's go with it. Who all have different voice actors, again, it wasn't just Tamara Morrison playing 4 people. But yeah, it had a really good script by Karen Travis, who wrote like the Mandalorian books and that kind of thing. And they haven't really returned to the Star Wars from that angle again. It was really nice to have this kind of completely grounded, like on the boots on the ground campaign set in the Star Wars universe. And there's lots of opportunities for them to do that with Rogue One, and given that they're making a movie that's a war story. They're making obviously the big battle game with Battlefront, but I would really like to see them do a kind of what's it like to be a boots on the ground stormtrooper. I mean, obviously maybe you'd have to make them not crap at everything for the purposes of the fantasy.
I mean, I'd love to see a proper, like, narrative-driven story as well. Like, my favourite Star Wars game is Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight, which is like this separate story about Kyle Katarn becoming a Jedi and all this kind of stuff. But it's had like its own little FMV cutscenes and stuff like that.
The FMV has not aged well.
Yeah, I watched some of it the other day. It looked really ropey now. Yeah. But through my rose-tinted glasses, it's still amazing to me, and it's still like almost as big a part of the Star Wars universe in terms of storytelling as the films were, just because I experienced it at such an influential age.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a substantial generation of people who were too young to see the first movies when they came out. Yeah. Old enough to see through the prequels, but who were probably at a really formative age when stories like Dark Forces and like the X-Wing series and that kind of thing. Like, I mean, we were saying this when we were talking about the EU, the expanded universe more generally. There's a lot of stories in the expanded universe that are now legends or non-canon, like Kyle Katarn stuff,
Mara Jade,
and all that kind of thing, and it's kind of time for them to start that again and just bring in, rather than, as we said earlier, retreading, like, let's find out more about Obi-Wan Kenobi, let's find out more about Han Solo than we already know. Especially with games work really well when the player's given a chance to direct the story a little bit, and that's much harder to do with lots of existing characters, whereas giving people new characters to steer through parts of the universe they haven't seen before, I think would be more interesting.
Definitely.
I mean, do you think we'll be seeing new takes on sort of old favourites, like we'll go back to Rogue Squadron? Will we see more Lego sort of stuff? I mean, that seems pretty much inevitable.
Yeah,
Lego's inevitable. Just broadly, Lego is inevitable.
Yeah. I mean, you've got like Disney Infinity and things like that, which are introducing Star Wars elements later this year. And Rogue Squadron would be great. I mean, it's a much loved series, kind of. It's a space sim where you're flying around in various ships and stuff. Which is
basically, let's face it, what most of us want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how we quite happily spend our lives. But
I mean, those elements are in Battlefront. You can pilot snow speeders and things like that in it. So those elements are being touched upon in future games, but a purely dedicated space sim hasn't been confirmed yet.
Yeah, and even then, like, Rogue Squadron was the kind of the arcade space game, the sort of third-person one, whereas what I think is less likely is a return to what are for many people the best Star Wars games ever made, like the TIE Fighter series and X-Wing Alliance, where those were really detailed simulations. Like actually, those games did more to establish how space combat actually works in that universe than almost any other media, because they had to figure it out. They had to figure out like, why is this? They'd almost reverse engineer the Imperial strategies you see in the films to make them work in a competitive environment or in an actual conflict, which is really interesting, because you go like, a lot of the things the Empire does don't make any sense. Like wings of like massive amounts of TIE fighters with no shields, and you realise it's they kind of built a game around that. And I'd love to see that come back, but I think that's probably the most unlikely thing, because it's the hardest to mass market.
Yeah, I guess, but also, I mean, the fact that Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen are pretty much the biggest things in the PC space right now, is, well, two of the biggest things in the PC space right now,
sure.
is, someone's obviously going to take note of that and maybe think, maybe it's time to bring back X-Wing and TIE Fighter.
It would make crazy amounts of money, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to run it on every platform imaginable and sell it on phones, so possibly not.
Well, presumably we'll find out a little bit more at E3. But for now, that's it for this week's Stay on Target. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking a bit about Star Wars Rebels. But until then, may the Force be with you.